Picture this. You're stumbling out of a storm-swept wreck onto a crumbling shoreline, the salty wind howling like an angry ex-girlfriend, and a faint, eerie chant drifting from the dunes. And suddenly, you realize the ghost of your own mother is yelling, "Malin," louder than your alarm clock on a Monday. Before we get any deeper, smash that like button if you love a good curse, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because I need to know if you're in a cozy bedroom or a dimly lit dorm. Now, dim the lights, grab your favorite snack, maybe something less cursed than a cursed stone, and settle in, because this isn't just a fairy tale. It's the original ghosting story that predates Instagram blocks by centuries. You feel the gritty sand squeezing between your toes, the cold spray of the tide kissing your skin, and the scent of wet mangrove wood mixing with the metallic tang of old shipwreck steel, all while the silhouette of a proud fisherman turns into a cold stone statue that could give any marble selfie a run for its money. In the 1800s, villagers whispered that a son who abandoned his roots would end up as a lifeless monument, a warning that still rings true in today's "you're on mute" Zoom calls, except the punishment here is literal petrification. So tell me, would you rather be turned to stone for disrespect, or just get endlessly muted? Let's find out together. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss another cursed classic. In the salty hush of a tiny fishing hamlet, the sunrise painted the thatch roofs gold like a cheap Instagram filter, and the air reeked of brine and fried sardines. Old women haggled over kelp-wrapped rice, while the village's lone well drummed a tinny rhythm against the tide. Among them, a lanky boy named Malin Kundang stared at the horizon, his eyes flickering with the kind of restless sparkle that would make even a pirate's parrot jealous. He dreamed of gilded ships, treasure chests heavier than his mother's sorrow, and a life where his name would echo louder than the gull's screeches. Meanwhile, his mother, bent by years of pulling nets and wiping tears, clutched a cracked kerosene lamp, feeling the weight of a future that might soon slip through her calloused fingers. One humid afternoon, Malin announced his grand exit, slapping his palm on the wooden dock as if sealing a contract with destiny. He handed his mother a battered amulet, promising to return with enough gold to buy the whole village a permanent Wi-Fi signal, because who needs fireflies when you have Netflix? His mother's lips trembled, a mix of pride and panic, as the scent of dried fish and salty seaweed rose like incense of an unwelcome omen. The townsfolk gathered, whispering jokes about the boy turning into a mermaid if the ocean turned him salty enough, while the village dog barked in rhythm with the waves. With a grin sharper than a shark's tooth, Malin boarded the creaking schooner, his heart pounding like a battered drum at a rock concert. The ship, a crooked timber beast christened the Sea Catcher, rocked like a toddler on a swing, its sails flapping in a language only gulls could translate. Malin leapt onto the deck, inhaling the stench of tar, sweat, and a hint of rotten sea cucumber that made his stomach churn in a strangely exhilarating way. The captain, a grizzled man with a beard that could hide a whole seagull colony, tossed a bottle of rum over his shoulder, shouting, "To fortune's lad, may you find more than just the plot of a bad pirate movie." As they sliced through turquoise waters, the sun baked the deck, turning the planks into a hot skillet that sizzled the skin of any barefoot sailor. Malin's mind raced, picturing himself on a throne of coral, draped in silks, while the sea whispered jokes about his mother's cooking, spicy enough to melt steel. But the ocean, ever the sarcastic mentor, soon hurled a storm that sounded like 1,000 angry drums, rain lashing the deck with the vigor of a wild drum solo. Waves towered like mountain goats, slamming the hull and spraying salty foam into Malin's eyes, making him blink as if he'd just watched a fireworks show underwater. The crew cursed, the captain swore on his last bottle of rum, and Malin clutched the pulse like a hidden heart. Every thunderclap seemed to echo his mother's whispered prayers, and the ship's timbers creaked in protest, as if the vessel itself doubted his lofty ambitions. Yet, when the storm passed, a glittering archipelago emerged, its islands shimmering like a playlist of disco balls, promising the riches Malin had chased. Back on the shore, his mother sat on the sand, the wind tugging at her hair, and the smell of wet earth mingling with the lingering perfume of sea salt, her heart a knot of hope and dread. She stared at the horizon, where gulls performed acrobatic pirouettes, wondering if the boy's silhouette would appear like a ghost in a daytime TV commercial. The village whispered about his fate, some chuckling that perhaps he'd become a legend brighter than a superhero's cape, others fearing he'd return as a statue made of coral and regret. Yet, every tide that lapped the pier reminded her that ambition, like the sea, never truly rests, and that one day Malin might sail back, not as a boy of dreams, but as a man forged by the very waves he once chased. For now, the only thing she could cling to was the faint, smoky scent of the lantern's wick, a reminder that even in darkness, a mother's love burns hotter than any treasure chest. The black clouds rolled like bruised fists across the horizon, and the wind howled like a chorus of angry spirits. Malin clutched the rail, his fingers raw from the rope's rough bark, as waves slammed the hull with the ferocity of 1,000 fists. Salt sprayed into his eyes, burning like cheap chili, but he laughed, shouting a defiant chant that drowned the thunder. The ship creaked, wood groaning under the pressure, yet Malin's boots stayed sure on the deck, every step a drumbeat of resolve. By dawn, the storm had peeled away, leaving a sea as calm as a catnap, and a crew awash in sea foam and triumph. News of that night traveled faster than gossip at a royal banquet, and the merchant captain took notice, promoting Malin to quartermaster with a wink. He learned to read the wind like a seasoned DJ reads a crowd, turning gusts into profit and danger into opportunity. The crew teased him, calling him the compass with a swagger, while he kept the cargo safe from pirate eyes that glinted like neon signs. Nights were spent polishing brass fixtures until they shone brighter than a disco ball, and mornings smelled of coconut oil and tar, a fragrant reminder of hard work. Each successful voyage added another notch to his belt, and the sea seemed to whisper, "You got this, kid." Soon, ports from Padang to Malacca echoed with tales of Malin's daring raids on rusted galleons, where he smuggled silks and spices as if stealing candy from a baby. The treasure chests he amassed clanged with the sound of coins that sang like a marching band's brass section. Merchants offered him contracts on parchment that smelled of ink and incense, promising riches that would make a dragon blush. Yet with each sack of gold, the scent of sweat, fish guts, and burnt rope clung to his coat, a gritty reminder that wealth never smells like roses. His fame grew so tall that a traveling bard once compared him to a real-life Tony Stark, minus the iron suit, but with equal sparkle. Irony, however, liked to hop aboard his ship like an unwanted stowaway. The very seas that lifted him began to test his humility, tossing him into squalls that smelled like rotten mangoes and algae. One evening, a gull perched on his shoulder and squawked, "You think you're king?" A feathered critique that made the crew burst into laughter louder than a tavern brawl. Malin shrugged, chuckling that even the ocean enjoys a good roast, and ordered a round of fermented kelp brew for everyone. The crew toasted, their mugs clinking like tiny bells, while the moon reflected off the water, turning the horizon into a silver runway for his ambitions. As the months rolled on, the sea's call grew louder, a siren song mixed with the creak of timber and the distant clang of distant bells. Malin stood on the prow, wind whipping his hair, feeling the spray sting his cheek like a lemon-sour candy. He vowed to chase every storm, every hidden cove, and every whispered legend that floated on salty breezes. The ocean answered with a rolling roar, urging him forward, and Malin answered with a hearty shout that could wake the very gods of the deep. The sun battered the cracked teak of Malin's bark as it scraped into the familiar cove, the gulls shrieking like drunken pirates on a Saturday night. He stepped aboard the dock, boots polished to a mirror shine, the scent of spiced rum and sea salt clinging to his coat like a rebellious perfume. The villagers gawked, whispering that the boy who once sold fish for a copper coin now commanded a fleet that could outsail a Netflix binge. Malin's chest puffed with the pride of a conquistador who just discovered Wi-Fi in the 1500s. He laughed, flashing a smile that could melt the hardest durian rind. Old bamboo huts squatted under a sky smeared with orange and ash, the air thick with the perfume of fried tofu and the acrid bite of firewood smoke. From a frail doorway shuffled a woman wrapped in a faded sarong, her eyes glittering like dim lanterns that had seen too many monsoons. She called his name, voice trembling as a tambourine in a marching band, pleading for the son who had vanished like a Snapchat story. The crowd smelled the salt on Malin's breath and the faint metallic tang of his polished swords, but his pride swelled like a balloon at a birthday party for a tyrant. He turned his back, the wind tossing his velvet cape as if the universe itself were mocking his newfound arrogance. "Aya," the mother whispered, hand outstretched, fingers knotted like the rope that once hauled his tiny canoe. The words tasted of bitter coffee and distant storms, each syllable a wave crashing against Malin's hardened heart. He scoffed, saying, "I am not the rag-clad boy you raised. I am Captain Malin, commander of the Sea Dragon, the very thing that makes your stories sound like bedtime lullabies." The irony dripped like rain on a tin roof. The very mother who fed him sago pudding now faced the son who had outgrown the very soup she stirred. The villagers winced, their faces reflecting the flicker of lanterns and a collective sigh that sounded like a busted accordion. A murmur rose, low as the creak of old wooden ships, as the mother's tears slicked the sand, mixing with the salty foam to create a salty sweet puddle. Malin's laugh cracked, sharper than a machete slicing through durian flesh, as he declared, "Your lineage is a footnote, not a headline." The crowd's chatter turned to sharp clacks, like marbles rolling on a temple floor, as they whispered about the son who'd turned his own mother into a footnote. The heat of the midday sun baked the thatch, making the air feel like a sauna inside a dragon's belly. Yet, beneath the sarcasm, a faint shiver crawled up Malin's spine, as if the ghost of his childhood were tugging at his cuff, reminding him of forgotten lullabies. Suddenly, the tide rose, dragging in a chorus of frogs that croaked like a badly dubbed sci-fi movie, and the sea sprayed a salty veil over the defiant captain's polished boots. In that moment, the village's ancient shaman, hunched like a retired Jedi, muttered an incantation that smelled of incense and old fish guts, warning that arrogance never sails without a storm. Malin felt his chest tighten, the pride that once felt like armor, now a suffocating cloak of woolly regret. The villagers watched, eyes wide, as a shadow flickered over the moon, hinting that the sea might claim its own child back, just as it once claimed the kraken in a bedtime story. And so, the legend of Malin Kundang began to sizzle like the hot oil in a wok, promising a moral that would roast future braggers for generations. In the dim glow of twilight, the old woman clutched her weather-worn shawl, her heart pounding like a war drum against her ribs. She whispered an ancient curse, each syllable tasting of salt, seaweed, and the sour bite of betrayal. The wind paused, as if holding its breath, while the distant gulls shrieked a mournful chorus that sounded suspiciously like a 1980s power ballad. Her tears mingled with the sand, dripping onto the tide-worn stones and leaving a salty, bitter bitter trail. The curse swirled around her like smoke from a dragon's nostril, fierce and unrelenting. Suddenly, a rogue gust rose from the ocean, snapping the sails as if they were paper napkins in a hurricane. The wind howled, a guttural roar that rattled the rusted iron bolts of Malin's ship, and it lifted the vessel like a child's toy in a playground. Deckhands clung to railings while the mast groaned, whining like a cat caught in a dryer. Waves crashed against the hull, spraying brine that stung eyes and coated faces with a gritty seafoam paste. The fierce wind, now a tyrant, hurled the ship toward the cliffs, its timbers shuddering under the divine smack of the curse. At the moment the prow struck the rocky shoreline, Malin's flesh began to calcify, each bone snapping into stone with the crisp crack of a popcorn kernel. His eyes widened in shock, then froze mid-blink, turning a cold, glittering amber that reflected the angry sky. The transformation was swift, a grotesque metamorphosis that smelled of wet cement and old graveyards, as if the earth itself were exhaling a funeral sigh. Ironically, his proud swagger turned to a stoic statue, a silent accusation etched into every vein of granite. The curse sealed him there, a marble version of a once boastful sailor, now as immobile as a Netflix "Are You Still Watching" screen. The newly minted stone figure stood at the shore, its feet planted in sand that dripped with seawater like sweat on a marathon runner's brow. Passers-by could hear the persistent whisper of the wind, now a sarcastic narrator rattling seashells and mocking the petrified captain. Children dared each other to touch the cold stone, only to recoil from the sharp, salty tang that lingered on their fingertips. The sea hissed around the base, spray spraying like a busted fire extinguisher, while gulls perched on the shoulders of the statue, cawing as if to announce a perpetual no-entry sign. Every wave that crashed against the rocks seemed to chant a warning, echoing through the night like a medieval warning siren with a modern twist. And so, the legend of Malin Kundang lives on, a cautionary tale served with a side of irony, reminding every brash youth that hubris can turn you into a living statue faster than a superhero sidekick gets a bad haircut. The Mother's Curse, now a tourist attraction, draws crowds who snap selfies with the stone sailor, oblivious to the faint scent of sea brine and regret that clings to the air. Even the wind, now a regular at the local tavern, boasts about its own power, boasting louder than a celebrity influencer on a live stream. As the night folds its dark blanket over the coast, the stone guardian remains, eyes forever fixed on the horizon, daring any soul to repeat his mistake. In the end, the shore sings a gruff lullaby. Respect your roots, or you'll end up as stiff as a board game piece in a pirate's pocket. When the sun dips behind the jagged cliffs of West Sumatra, the village elders huddle around the crackling fire and whisper the tale of the stone that watches over them. That cold gray monolith rises from the sand like a forgotten Wi-Fi router, always there, but nobody knows what signals it's broadcasting. Its surface glistens with salt spray, and the wind carries the faint scent of damp kelp and burnt coconut husks, reminding listeners of storms long past. Children cling to their mothers' skirts, eyes wide as the sea, while the old men tap their canes in rhythm, as if the stone itself were keeping a beat. All this, they say, is a reminder that pride can harden a heart faster than any tide. Malin Kundang was once a lanky fisher boy who could toss a net faster than a TikTok dancer shuffles through a trend. He chased the glitter of foreign ships, swapping his village's humble fish stew for the slick smell of rum and cigar smoke in bustling ports. Each time he returned, his pockets swelled with gold coins that clinked like a mischievous metal choir, and his swagger grew as thick as the mangrove roots. He bragged to the market women that his mother's prayers were just background music to his success, a notion that legend turned into a self-made mogul. His mother, now frail and wrapped in a woven shawl that smelled of incense and old rain, bowed before him, eyes glistening with tears and hope. Malin, eyes narrowed like a bored cat, scoffed and shouted, "Who are you? I'm too busy counting my loot to waste time on a stranger." In that split second, the sea seemed to hold its breath, and an ancient curse, older than the first coconut tree, surfaced from the depths, turning his proud chest to stone. The transformation crackled, the air filled with the sour smell of petrified fish, and Malin's once mighty frame froze into the very statue the villagers now feared. Now the stone stands at the beach's edge, its cold fingers gripping the sand like a miser clutching his last coin. When the tide rolls in, salty foam splashes against its base, sending a hiss that sounds like 1,000 whispering ghosts demanding respect. Tourists snap selfies, unaware that the stone's eyes seem to follow them, a silent judge judging their Instagram captions about living my best life. Even the monkeys pause, clutching half-eaten mangoes, as if to say, "Hey, don't forget to call your mom." At sunset, the stone glows amber, and the villagers gather to share roasted fish, the smell of charred flesh mingling with the ocean's brine, a bittersweet reminder of what pride costs. The legend of Malin Kundang, etched in stone and memory, drifts through the village like a lingering sea breeze, soft enough to soothe, sharp enough to sting. Parents point to the granite monument and warn their children that disrespect can turn a living soul into a statue faster than you can binge-watch a whole season of a show. In the end, humility becomes the true treasure, more valuable than any gold coin that could ever fit into a fisherman's pocket. So the next time you hear a brag louder than a siren, remember Malin's fate and keep your feet on the ground, lest you end up as cold as the stone they call the Mother's Revenge. And if you ever feel like a superhero who can't be stopped, just picture Malin's grimace, his ego frozen mid-roar, because even Avengers need to check their ego at the door. The salty wind slaps the thatched roofs. Fishermen haul nets heavy with slippery silver. The village smells of fried fish and incense from the modest shrine. Sitangang darts between stalls, his bare feet slapping mud, while his widowed mother hums lullabies that sound like old sea shanties. Everyone calls him the pride of the coast, as if he were a miniature sultan in training. One twilight, an itinerant merchant spins yarns of glittering palaces, jeweled turbans, and silken carpets that could swallow a whole warship. Sea's eyes widen like lanterns, and a hot fire of ambition ignites in his chest, hotter than the grill roasting the day's catch. He declares, loud as a drum, that he will abandon the net and sail straight into the Sultan's court to prove his worth beyond the village's fishing pits. His mother clutches her rosary, the beads slipping like wet clamshells, fearing his pride will drown him. The other villagers chuckle, whispering that the boy's head is bigger than his boat. Yet the sea has a way of tugging at the heart, and sea feels the pull of filial duty like a tide pulling at his ankle. Every morning, he watches his mother scrape fresh fish, the scent of brine and sweat mingling with the sweet incense of jasmine that she burns for protection. The village elder warns, pride without respect is a boat without a rudder, and the words echo like a distant conch. Sea's chest swells with both longing for the Sultan's glitter and dread of betraying his mother's sacrifices. He stands at the shoreline, a jittery superhero torn between saving the world and staying home to clean his mother's chipped porcelain plates. He imagines himself as a Javanese James Bond, suave in a silk coat, wielding a kriss that could cut through bureaucracy like a sushi knife. The thought makes him grin, but the reality smells like fish guts and sunburned skin, far from the scented oil lamps of the palace. A gull swoops, cawing, as if to remind him that even in cartoons, the hero must first finish his chores. His mother, eyes watery, hands him a battered wooden comb, a relic that once styled the Sultan's hair, now only good for untangling fishnets. The irony drips like rain on a tin roof. He seeks glory, but the only crown he wears is a dented cap made of coconut husk. As the moon rises, painting the sea with silver, Si Tanggang tightens his resolve, his heart beating like a drum in a war dance. He vows to sail at dawn, clutching a small amulet his mother gave, its scent of sandalwood a promise of protection. The villagers watch, half amused, half fearful, as he steps onto a rickety boat that creaks like an old storyteller's spine. The wind whistles a mournful tune, warning that pride can turn the calm into a tempest. Thus the stage is set, the proud sun ready to trade the gentle lull of waves for the thunderous applause of a sultan's court, unaware that the gods of the coast are already sharpening their nets. Si Tanggang sets sail from his tiny sampan, the wood creaking like an old rocker on a porch of mist. He bartered his rickety vessel for a gleaming galley that shone brighter than a karaoke stage under neon lights. The new ship smelled of tar, fresh paint, and a whiff of ambition that made the gulls squawk in disapproval. As the waves slapped the hull, Tanggang puffed out his chest, humming a triumphant chant that echoed across the archipelago. The locals watched him disappear over the horizon, half in awe and half in dread of what swagger could bring. Soon the galley docked at a bustling market port, where traders piled high baskets of spices, dried fish, and glittering glass beads. Merchants bowed low, not because they were polite, but because they feared the rumor that Tanggang could turn a coconut into gold with a single grin. He swaggered among them, demanding a private berth and a feast of soto that would make a chef weep with envy. The head merchant, a wiry man with a scar shaped like an exclamation point, obliged, serving broth so hot it steamed like a dragon's breath. Tanggang laughed, slurping the soup like a rock star gulping a latte, his eyes glittering with the promise of endless conquest. But the sea does not bow to ego alone. A sudden storm rolled in, its clouds dark as charcoal, and its wind howling like a banshee with a microphone. Rain hammered the deck, turning the polished planks into slick, slithering serpents. Tanggang barked orders, his voice cutting through thunder, as if he were announcing the next episode of a reality show. Bandits on dark skiffs tried to board, their swords dripping with the salty scent of fear, only to be chased off by Tanggang's crew, who swung oars like giant spatulas. The storm passed, leaving a rainbow that seemed to mock his inflated pride with its perfect arch. When the galley finally crested the sand dunes of the royal harbor, the city unfolded like a tapestry of incense, bustling crowds, and the faint hum of gamelan that could rival any pop anthem. Guards in ornate armor opened the massive gate, their polished helmets reflecting Tanggang's flamboyant coat like a mirror ball at a wedding. He strutted through the courtyard, the scent of jasmine mingling with the sweat of his own hubris, and tossed a flamboyant salute that made the palace pigeons flutter in confused admiration. Royal officials, draped in silk and burdened with protocol, exchanged nervous glances. Some whispered that they'd seen a peacock try to act like a phoenix. Tanggang, oblivious, chuckled and declared he would be the kingdom's newest hero, as if announcing a sequel to a blockbuster he'd never actually filmed. Inside the throne hall, golden chandeliers swung lazily, casting shadows that danced like mischievous sprites on the marble floor. The king, a stoic figure with eyes that seemed to flicker like old cinema reels, listened as Tanggang boasted about his daring voyages, his voice bouncing off the walls like a rubber ball in a hallway. The courtiers whispered, clutching their scrolls tighter than a teenager clutching their phone, aware that hubris often comes with a price tag written in invisible ink. Yet Tanggang's swagger was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife, and the air smelled of sandalwood, sweat, and the faint hint of impending retribution. As the chapter closed, the audience raging storm of destiny, ready to sweep away the pomp and perhaps teach the boastful sailor a lesson as old as the seas themselves. Under a vaulted sky mottled with silk banners, the Sultan draped Si Tanggang in a robe studded with amber beads and whispered a title that glittered like a neon sign, Prince of the Golden Path. Courtiers clapped, their palms slapping the marble like rain on a tin roof, while incense spiraled up, smelling of cinnamon and burned sandalwood. The prince's eyes widened at the cascade of gifts, a jeweled dagger, a chest of spiced mangoes, and a carriage as golden as a sunrise over Bali. Even the palace cook paused his sizzling walk to stare, half expecting the carriage to sprout wings and take off like a superhero. The whole scene felt like a royal TikTok, each moment curated for maximum sparkle. When the gilded wheels rolled out of the palace courtyard, the streets trembled under their weight, rattling the tin roofs of the nearby homes. Children chased the carriage's shadow, their laughter cracking like shells under a wave, while the scent of fried fish mingled with the sweet perfume of jasmine from market stalls. Si Tanggang perched on the plush seat, clutching the reins with a swagger that would make a Hollywood starlet blush. The carriage rattled over puddles, splashing muddy water onto the backs of unsuspecting passers-by, who slipped and cursed like cartoon characters. The whole procession smelled of oil, polished wood, and a faint hint of triumph, as if the road itself were being polished for his arrival. Back in his village, Si Tanggang burst onto the square like a fireworks display gone rogue, shouting his deeds louder than a rooster on a sunrise alarm. "I've come back a prince," he roared, his voice echoing off the thatched roofs, while his mother, eyes weary from years of humble chores, offered a gentle reminder of modesty. He waved his jeweled dagger, flicking sparks that landed on the thatch, and dismissed her counsel with a laugh that sliced the air like a blade. Villagers gawked, half in awe, half in disbelief, as the golden carriage hissed and coughed out a plume of oil smoke that smelled like burnt rubber. The irony hung heavy. A boy who once fetched water from the creek now flaunted riches like a peacock strutting through a mud pit. Soon, the villagers' smiles cracked, revealing teeth tarnished with resentment, as Si Tanggang flaunted his silken shirts and golden bangles at every door. Mothers whispered that the boy who once helped mend fishing nets now smelled of incense and arrogance, a fragrance that clung to him like a bad aftershave. His brother, who once shared rice from a single bowl, now recoiled whenever Si Tanggang tossed a handful of coins, the metal clinking like the jingle of a broken piggy bank. Even the village dogs, normally lazy and slobbery, growled low, their noses twitching at the unfamiliar perfume of perfume, a scent that reminded everyone of the city's polished pretensions. The air thickened with the sour tang of old mud and fresh disdain, a stew simmering on the brink of boiling over. Yet beneath the glitter and the jeers, a quiet tension throbbed like a drumbeat in a midnight ceremony. Si Tanggang, perched atop his golden throne, failed to see the storm gathering in the eyes of those he once called kin. The Sultan's favor had turned into a glittering shackles, each jewel a weight pulling his heart deeper into hubris. As the sun set, casting amber shadows over the thatched roofs, the villagers whispered ancient verses, hoping the gods would remember humility's sweet, earthy scent. Little did Si Tanggang know, the very gold that sang of his glory would soon clang a warning louder than any royal decree. High above the restless sea, the heavens flared like a scalded kettle, thunder growling a warning that would make even a night shift barista wince. The clouds gathered in angry spirals, each puff a sneering eyebrow at Si Tanggang's swagger. He strutted on the deck, chest puffed, bragging that his ship could outrun a cheetah on roller skates, while gulls muttered gossip behind his back. The gods, fed up with his boastful banter, whispered a storm into existence, their voices as cold as the iron hinges of a jail cell. A sudden chill slipped down the spine of every sailor, as if someone had turned the air conditioner to Arctic blast. The wind erupted, a torrent of salty teeth that slapped the sails into a frantic howl. Waves slammed the hull like mischievous toddlers punching a waterbed, spraying brine that stung like cheap aftershave. The mast shivered, then cracked, sending a deafening crack that echoed across the horizon like a broken guitar string. Sitangang clutched the splintered rail, his knuckles whitening as if he were trying to squeeze the last bit of honesty out of a politician. Lightning stitched the sky with white-hot scars, each flash exposing his trembling face and the absurdity of his earlier brag about outsailing the gods. Desperate, he lunged for the broken mast, his boots slipping on the slick deck, sending spray up his nose that tasted of iron and regret. The storm's fury wrapped around him like a villain's cape, whipping his hair into a chaotic halo that could have starred in a superhero trailer. As the mast twisted, a gout of rain drenched him, turning his proud shouts into guttural croaks. In that jagged moment, the heavens seized his arrogant heart and poured cold stone over his skin, petrifying his scream into a silent sigh. The transformation felt like being turned into an overcooked marshmallow, soft inside, hard as a pop culture meme about being frozen in time. When the tempest finally exhaled, the sea calmed into a sullen, oily mirror, reflecting a lone statue that stood on the shore like a forgotten Wi-Fi router. The stone figure bore the exact posture of a man mid-roar, fingers clenched around an invisible wheel, eyes forever fixed on the horizon as if awaiting a Netflix reboot. Seagulls circled, their caws sounding like cheap applause for a performance that never got a standing ovation. The salty breeze smelled of wet sand, old rope, and the faint perfume of hubris, making passers-by shiver with a mixture of awe and uneasy giggles. Children tossed pebbles at its base, each thud a reminder that even the mightiest can be reduced to a tourist photo op. Now the stone Sitangang watches over the beach, a silent judge of bragging tourists who brag about their Instagram followers as loudly as he once bragged about his cargo. The locals tell the tale with a wink, noting that the statue's cold stare could melt the heart of a TikTok influencer if they dared to whisper humble brag. Yet the wind still carries the faint echo of his once booming voice, a reminder that arrogance is as fleeting as a Snapchat story. The gods, perched on fluffy clouds, sip their celestial coffee and smirk, convinced that even divine retribution can have a sense of humor. And so, the legend endures. Pride may launch a ship, but the gods will always have the ultimate plot twist, turning egos into stone statues for the world to stare at. When the sun dips behind the mangrove fringe, the village gathers around the weather-worn stone of Sitangang, its surface slick with sea salt spray and the lingering perfume of burnt incense. Children perch on woven bamboo stools, eyes wide as the cicada chorus swells like an overexcited stadium crowd. Elders cough out stories, their voices crackling like the fire pits that dot the clearing. The stone, cool and gritty under palm leaf mats, seems to hum with the ghost of a once boastful fisherman turned noble. Even the moonlight shivers on its rough face, as if winking at the crowd. They tell how Sitangang, once a humble netcaster, rode a dazzling rise to aristocracy, flashing gold bangles that clinked louder than a rock star's pyrotechnics. Yet his arrogance grew like a swollen river, and he dared to snub the very village that fed him, shouting, "I'm above you," as though he'd just discovered he was the main character in a video game cutscene. The elders mimic his haughty tone, making the youngsters grin, then shudder at the sting of his pride. The tale drips with irony. The man who chased prestige ended up chasing his own shadow. The wind carries the salty sting of fish guts, a reminder of his greasy beginnings. When the gods grew tired of his bluster, they summoned a thunderstorm that roared like a dragon on a caffeine binge, hurling lightning that cracked the sky open. Si Dangang's opulent carriage toppled, and he was turned to stone, his flesh hardening into the very rock that now holds his name. The stone feels rough, like sandpaper scraped over a raw palm, and if you press your ear to it, you hear a low, mournful hum, almost the echo of his lost laughter. Children dare each other to touch the cold surface, only to recoil as the salty breeze whispers, "Remember humility." The irony is thick as the mud that once soaked his boots. The proud man now serves as a cold, unmovable lesson. Each generation retells the saga, sprinkling it with jokes about modern celebs who forget their roots. Think of a rock star who trades his fender for a feathered hat and then loses the crowd. The elders chuckle, pointing out that Si Dangang's downfall smells worse than yesterday's durian spill, a pungent reminder that hubris leaves a sour aftertaste. Children giggle, yet their faces flush when the story bites back, like the sting of a wasp hovering over their rice field. The moral slides into their minds smoother than butter on warm roti, insisting that glory fades faster than a Snapchat story. And as the fireflies blink, they whisper that humility is the only armor that never rusts. Tonight, as the drum beats thrum like a stubborn heart, the stone of Si Dangang stands sentinel, its shadows stretching like long-armed grandparents hugging the village. Villagers leave the clearing with sand stuck to their shoes and a fresh resolve to honor their ancestors, their hearts beating in rhythm with the tide's hush. The legend, now a living compass, points them toward modesty, reminding them that a humble net can catch more than a glittering crown. Even the village cat, sleek as a ninja, slinks past the stone, pausing to sniff the salty air before sauntering away, as if to say, "Even I know when to respect the boss." When the next child asks for a tale, the elder leans in, eyes twinkling, and says, "Listen close, or you'll end up like a stone statue on Instagram, forever frozen, forever ignored." So the story endures, a gritty, fragrant thread woven through generations, guiding every step like a lantern in the night. In the amber glow of dawn, the highlands of ancient Sunda drape themselves in a quilt of mist, smelling of damp earth and pine sap like a giant's aftershave. Sankryong, a wiry hunter with a grin sharper than his spear, tightened his leather thong and slung his bow over his shoulder. He'd been chasing whispers of a golden deer that glittered like a superhero's shield in the forest's heart. The wind hissed through the bamboo, rattling like a broken accordion, while fireflies flickered like nervous paparazzi. He marched onward, heart thudding like a tribal drum, ready to turn myth into meat, or at least a story for the village elders. The forest greeted him with a cacophony. Cicadas sang opera, monkeys chattered gossip, and unseen beetles clattered like a soundtrack for a low-budget horror flick. Vines tangled his legs, sucking the sweat from his skin and leaving a lingering taste of bitter sap on his lips. Suddenly, the canopy split, and a flash of golden fur leapt between the trunks, as if a sunrise had sprinted out to play hide-and-seek. Sankryang froze, eyes narrowed, breath fogging in the cool air, while the deer paused, its antlers glinting like a crown of LED lights from a sci-fi movie. He raised his spear, feeling the weight of destiny, or at least the weight of a very heavy piece of wood. With a swift flick, he lunged, and the golden deer bolted, hooves striking the fallen leaves with a sound like crunchy popcorn. The chase became a slapstick ballet. Sankryang slipped on a slime-slick mushroom, landing in a puddle that smelled like rotten onions mixed with wet stone. The deer, however, was surprisingly polite, pausing to let him catch his breath before darting into a clearing bathed in a honey-colored glow. When Sankryang finally caught the creature, its coat shimmered, reflecting every hue of sunrise, and a sweet, incense-like perfume rose from its flank, making his nose twitch in bewildered delight. He hauled the luminous prize back to his camp, feeling both triumphant and oddly humbled, like a kid who just won a golden ticket, except the ticket was a living deer. As he tied the deer to a sturdy branch, the animal's eyes widened, revealing orbs that pulsed with an inner fire, like the glow of a video game boss before the final showdown. A low, resonant chant rose from the forest floor, vibrating through the moss and making the stone underfoot hum, nature's very own bass drop. The deer lifted its head, and a cascade of silver sparks erupted, dissolving into smoke that smelled of fresh rain and burnt incense. In that instant, Sankryang realized he wasn't holding a mere animal, but a spirit guardian, a deity masquerading as a trophy, as sly as Loki, and as majestic as a dragon from a fantasy epic. He laughed, half in awe, half in disbelief, as the forest seemed to wink at him, whispering that the hunt had just turned into a cosmic dating game. Back at the village clearing, the hunters gathered, eyes wide, ears prickling at the scent of pine resin and the faint echo of the spirit's laughter. Sankryang released the deer with a solemn bow, watching it vanish into a cloud of glittering mist that smelled like jasmine and wet stone, leaving behind only the faint echo of hooves and a lingering sense of wonder. The elder chuckled, comparing the tale to a modern superhero origin story, while the children snapped their fingers, convinced they'd just witnessed a live-action meme. Yet, as the sun slipped behind the volcanic silhouette of Tangkuban Perahu, a rumble rose from the earth, promising that the spirit's blessing, or curse, would shape the mountain's future. And so, the stage was set for a fateful encounter that would etch Sankryang's name into legend, much like a viral hashtag that never fades. Under the emerald canopy of the Sunda Highlands, a lanky hunter named Sankryang stalked a deer that smelled like pine and sweat. The rustle of leaves announced his arrival at a hidden grove where Dayang Sumbi, a maiden with moon-bright eyes, was gathering wild ginger and humming a tune that could coax a frog into a chorus. She welcomed the stranger with a smile as warm as sunrise on river stones, oblivious to the fact that his scarred shoulder bore the mark of a forgotten god. Sankryang, who had just escaped the clutches of a thunderstorm that smelled of ozone, felt his heart thump louder than a drum circle at a wedding. Little did they know, the forest was listening, and the ancient gods were already scrolling through their celestial chat. Sankryang settled under Sumbi's thatched hut, where the air was thick with the sweet rot of fermenting rice and the sharp bite of citrus leaves. He helped her crush the ginger on a stone slab, the gritty paste splattering like mud on a teenager's shirt, while they laughed at each other's clumsy attempts. Night fell, and fireflies flickered like paparazzi, casting a golden glow on their faces as they shared stories of heroic beasts and mischievous spirits. Their fingers brushed over a steaming bowl of sago, and a spark leapt between them brighter than any TikTok dance challenge. By dawn, the duo was tangled in vines and longing, swearing an oath that even the mountain's echo could hear. High above the mist, the pantheon of gods perched on clouds shaped like giant teacups, sipping thundercloud espresso and muttering about mortal meddling. One ancient deity, with a beard as tangled as jungle vines, whispered a warning. Any union between Sankryang and Sumbi would breach the sacred law that forbids a child courting its own mother. The warning drummed in Sankryang's ears like a distant war tambourine, but he was too busy dreaming of marriage proposals that smelled like jasmine incense. Sumbi, unaware of the divine memo, prepared a bamboo loom to weave a wedding canopy, humming a tune that sounded suspiciously like a modern love ballad. The gods chuckled, their laughter echoing like distant thunder, already plotting a trial that would make the couple's love feel like stepping on a Lego in the dark. The irony was richer than the coconut milk soup simmering over the fire. A handsome hunter, who once outran a herd of wild boars, now faced a paperwork-style curse from celestial bureaucrats. Sangkuriang tried to protest, waving his wooden spear like a conductor's baton, but the gods were deaf to mortal drama series. Meanwhile, Dayang Sumbi, convinced that love could move mountains, suggested they construct a boat in a single night, because why not turn romance into an extreme DIY project? Their hands smeared with sawdust and sweat, they hammered timber that roared with the scent of fresh pine and the occasional bite of a curious mosquito. The whole scene felt like a low-budget fantasy movie, complete with dramatic lighting and a cameo from a mischievous monkey stealing their offering. As the first light cracked the horizon, a rumble rose from the earth, and the volcano Tangkuban Perahu yawned like an angry dragon who'd just been woken from a nap. The gods' trial unfolded. The fledgling couple had to finish the boat before the volcano erupted, or risk being turned into stone statues that tourists would selfie-snap centuries later. Sangkuriang's muscles quivered, his breath stank of burnt reeds, yet his resolve hardened like the basalt forming the volcano's rim. Dayang Sumbi clutched his wrist, feeling the pulse of love and the cold panic of impending doom, whispering a promise that even if the world fell apart, their story would still echo in the wind. The stage was set, the drama primed, and the mountain waited, ready to turn love, irony, and a half-built boat into an explosive legend. When the moon slipped silver across the bamboo canopy, Dayang Sumbi's heart thudded like a drum in a war film. She had just recognized the wiry, wild-eyed hunter before her as the son she had buried in the river years ago. The realization hit her harder than a sledgehammer. Her own flesh was about to become her husband. In a flash of maternal fury and clever dread, she spat out an impossible challenge. Build a boat the size of a mountain before sunrise, or we cannot wed. She imagined the poor fool scrambling for timber, while the roosters crowed their sunrise alarm. The air smelled of fresh rain and burnt incense, a volatile mix that hinted at the chaos to come. A Dayang Sumbi, a queen of cunning, slipped into the forest shadow like a ninja-level strategist, drafting a blueprint on a leaf with charcoal that smelled like smoked wood. She pictured the hulking vessel with a hull so wide it could swallow a herd of water buffalo, its brow pointing skyward like a spear of destiny. Her mind flickered to modern memes. This is not a drill, it's a canoe. Just to keep the dread at bay. She whispered to the wind, "Let the wood bite, the nails scream, and the night swallow my plan." The cicadas sang a dissonant chorus, as if mocking her audacity. Sangkuriang, whose ego was as inflated as a freshly inflated balloon animal at a birthday party, roared his acceptance, his eyes flashing like a video game boss level. He summoned the forest spirits, coaxing a troop of mischievous gibbons and a thunder-bellowing rakshasa to haul timber faster than a TikTok trend goes viral. The trees shivered, shedding bark that smelled of sap and sweat, while the ground trembled under the weight of his ambition. He brandished a colossal axe, its blade humming like a lightsaber in the night, and barked orders that rang sharper than a gong. The night air grew thick with the scent of pine resin and raw ambition. Under a sky bruised purple, the frantic construction roared to life. Logs cracked like the snare of a drum machine, and hammers hammered out a frantic rhythm that echoed through the valleys. Sweat dripped into Sangkuriang's eyes, stinging like sand at the beach after a storm, while the fire pits spat sparks that smelled like burnt popcorn. The boat swelled, its hull ballooning and groaning, each board protesting the impossible weight like a chorus of squeaky toys. As the first pink fingers of dawn curled over the horizon, the river hissed, daring the unfinished masterpiece to sail. Yet the vessel stood half-formed, a massive wooden beast that reeked of pine, oil, and the bitter aftertaste of failure. When the sun finally rose, Dayang Sumbi smiled, her plan as solid as the volcanic rock that would soon erupt in her grief. Sangkuriang, cheeks felt his pride shrink faster than a Netflix series after one season. In his fury, he hurled the unfinished hull into the river, and the water boiled as if the volcano itself were an angry barista brewing a bitter espresso. The massive wooden hull cracked, splintered, and the volcano's crater opened, shaping itself into the prow of a boat forever stuck in stone, a perpetual reminder that some challenges are truly impossible. The tale spreads through the mountains, retold by firelight, with each listener giggling at the divine irony that even gods can be tripped up by a mother's crafty test. When the first amber fingers of dawn pry open the night, the unfinished canoe groans like an old wooden wardrobe under a mischievous cat. Sangkuriang's crew, ghostly whispers of reeds and stubborn pine, watch as the hull flexes and snaps, spilling splinters that clang against the wet earth. The smell of fresh timber mingles with a sour whiff of sweat and damp mud as the boat collapses into a tangled heap. A chorus of startled jungle birds erupts, their shrieks puncturing the morning calm like a broken record stuck on repeat. Even the sun seems to smirk, casting a golden spotlight on the disaster, as if the universe just handed Sangkuriang a slapstick punchline. Sangkuriang's eyes flare red, hotter than a charcoal grill left on too long, and his voice booms louder than a village drum circle on payday. He snarls, his anger crackling like static on an old TV set, and fists pound the ground with the force of a toddler demanding candy. The air thickens with the metallic tang of his rage, a scent that makes the nearby squirrels scatter like nervous fans at a rock concert. Each thud sends tremors through the forest floor, rattling leaves and coaxing a chorus of annoyed insects into a frantic chorus. The whole world seems to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when his fury finally finds an outlet. In a sudden cinematic swing, think a superhero flinging a busted car, Sangkuriang hurls the broken hull into the earth, and the wood shatters with a deafening crack that echoes like a gunshot in a silent film. The impact gouges a jagged scar across the hillside, splitting the soil open like a giant's angry mouth, spilling loam, roots, and the smell of fresh earth and burnt resin. Mud splashes, spraying salty, gritty droplets onto nearby trees, which shiver as if they've just been sprayed with a frothy latte. The ground quivers, sending a ripple of tremors that roll through the valley, making every stone sing a low, ominous hum. The scene smells of iron, sweat, and the sweet, acrid perfume of volcanic anticipation. From the newly yawned fissure, the dormant Tangkuban Perahu awakens with a bellyful of rumbling that sounds suspiciously like a giant dragon sneezing. Smoke pours out, thick and black, curling like the smoke rings from a barista's espresso machine, while orange-hot ash spews up, turning the sunrise into a dramatic Hollywood special effect. The air grows hot, tasting like burnt toast and pepperoni, and the wind carries a hiss louder than any pop concert's crowd roar. Birds flee in a chaotic V formation, their feathers singed by the sudden heat, while the hillside rumbles, sending vibrations through the very bones of those watching. Even the rocks seem to shudder, as if embarrassed to be part of this over-the-top volcanic debut. When the earth's wound began to swell, a mighty mound thrust up from the jungle, like a giant hiccup that never quite stopped. The new peak rose with a roar of cracking stone, its rim curving into the shape of an upturned boat, so perfect you could almost hear a wooden hull creak in the wind. Sunlight slashed the smoky veil, painting the volcanic ash gold, while the scent of wet moss and sulfur wrestled for dominance in the air. Villagers stared, eyes wide as they imagined the vessel of some celestial cargo. Even the mischievous monkeys chattered as if they'd spotted a giant's abandoned canoe drifting on a sea of fire. At the foot of this newborn mountain lived Dayang Sumbi, a maiden whose beauty could outshine a sunrise, and whose temper was as sharp as a grist blade. Sangkuriang, her own son, returned home after years of wandering, looking slick in a leather jacket that would make any modern-day teen in a Netflix series jealous. He fell head over heel for the very woman who raised him, a love so forbidden it made the gods blush and the village gossipers clutch their pearls. Their secret rendezvous filled the night with whispered vows, the crackle of bamboo torches, and the occasional giggle when a stray goat knocked over a pot of fragrant rice. Hubris swelled in Sangkuriang's chest, as if he were auditioning for a role in a mythic superhero saga where the hero thinks he can rewrite destiny. The earth could not tolerate such audacious love, and it split with a thunderous crack that rattled the very bones of the forest. Lava spewed like a dragon's tantrum, scorching the roots of trees and painting the sky a lurid orange that would make a sunrise jealous. The air thickened with the taste of brimstone on the tongue, and the ground trembled underfoot, sending a chorus of startled crickets into a frantic symphony. Dayang Sumbi watched, her heart thudding like a drum in a war march, as the volcano's fury carved a jagged crown around the crater. Even the clouds seemed to sigh, releasing a fine ash that settled like gritty sugar on the villagers' shoulders. In that smoky twilight, Dayang Sumbi raised trembling hands and whispered a prayer that tasted of rain-kissed earth and sorrowful wind. Her words, soft yet fierce, sealed the volcano's raw power, binding the molten rage to the stone like a lid on a bubbling cauldron. The prayer echoed through the canyon, weaving through rock and leaf, and the volcano's roar softened to a low, mournful hum, as if a giant had taken a deep, regretful breath. The scent of incense mingled with the lingering ozone, calming the nerves of even the most daring youths who dared to mock the divine drama. The mountain, now named Tangkuban Perahu, stood as a solemn promise, its upturned hull forever pointing skyward, a reminder that passions left unchecked can reshape the world. Generations later, children still gather at the volcano's rim, tossing pebbles that clatter like tiny cymbals against the stone, while elders tell the tale with a wink and a warning. Don't be like Sangkuriang, they chuckle, unless you fancy a DIY disaster that would make even Thor sweat. The story rides the wind, reminding every ear that hubris can turn love into lava, and that forbidden romance may leave a crater in the heart of the land. As night falls, the scent of roasted corn mingles with ash, and the volcano's silhouette glows like a ghostly, upturned ship sailing on a sea of stars. In that glow, the warning remains clear. Respect the earth's wounds, or they'll rise again, boat-shaped and booming, to teach us another hard-earned lesson. The night the sea turned rogue, the sky cracked like an old drum, hurling rain that smacked the thatched roofs of a tiny Javanese fishing village. Arjuna, the village's most brawny fisherman, wrestled his net while his wife Siddhi clutched her swollen belly, pleading to the storm gods for a safe delivery. The wind howled like a chorus of angry spirits, and every wave slammed the shore as if the ocean were trying to swallow the whole hamlet. Yet amidst the chaos, a sudden pinch of pain signaled that Siddhi's baby was coming, and she screamed louder than the gulls circling above. By the time the storm finally sighed, the newborn's first wail mingled with the echoing thunder, announcing a life woven into the very tempest. When the rain finally relented, the surf withdrew, leaving a thin veil of sea foam that cradled the tiny babe like a silvery cradle. The villagers, eyes wide and drenched, gathered around the foam-covered infant, gasping at the salty scent that clung to the newborn's skin. An old shaman, with a beard as tangled as kelp, declared the child a gift from the ocean, naming her Roro Kidul, the princess of the southern sea. Mothers whispered that the sea had taken a liking to her, comparing her to a pearl that had slipped from the moonlit waves onto the sand. The crowd cheered, half in awe, half in disbelief, villagers spun sagas of giant leviathans, hidden coral palaces, and a queen who ruled the waters with a trident of moonlight. And the girl listened, eyes sparkling like sun-kissed surf. She learned to read the currents, feeling the pull of each incoming swell as if it were a whisper in her ear. Whenever fishermen hauled in a net, she'd splash a playful splash, coaxing the fish to leap like acrobats in a watery circus. By the time she could stride across the village square, the ocean seemed to follow her, humming an ancient rhythm that no one else could hear. Ironically, Roro's favorite pastime became pretending to be a human-like mermaid, much to the villagers' amusement. Some even joked she was auditioning for a Javanese version of Disney's The Little Mermaid. She'd slip a fish-scale shawl over her shoulders and strut along the pier, winking at the market ladies who swore the sea smelled better on her than on their fishmongers. Her humor was as salty as the brine. When a crab pinched her toe, she laughed louder than the market vendors haggling over batik cloth. The irony wasn't lost on the shaman, who warned that a child who jokes with the ocean might end up married to a wave, a fate both romantic and slippery. Still, Roro's grin never faded, even when the wind stole her straw hat, and she chased it down the dunes like a scene straight out of a slapstick silent film. By the time she was 10, the sea had already claimed more of her destiny than any human could ever hope to understand. On a moonless night, the tide rose in a sudden surge, draping the shoreline in a luminous veil that seemed to pulse with Roro's heartbeat. She stepped into the water without hesitation, feeling the cool fingers of the ocean wrap around her ankles, pulling her deeper as if inviting her to a grand ballroom beneath the waves. The villagers watched, half terrified, half entranced, as the sea whispered promises of power, love, and an eternal throne beneath the surf. From that night onward, Roro Kidul was no longer just a child of the village. She became the living embodiment of the southern sea, a queen whose crown was made of foam, her scepter a coral staff, and whose legend would ripple through Javanese lore for centuries to come. Roro was just a village girl with sand stuck in her hair and a habit of staring at the horizon as if the ocean were a gossip column. One scorching afternoon, a strange tug gnawed at her ribs, pulling her thoughts southward like a tide-filled magnet. She slipped past the market stalls, left a half-eaten satay behind, and trekked toward the jagged cliffs of Parangtritis. The wind sang salty verses, and the sun painted the sky the color of bruised mangoes, urging her forward. By dusk, she stood at the edge, feeling both terrified and oddly excited, as if she'd just been handed a backstage pass to a cosmic concert. The sea roared a low chant, spelling her name in bubbles that popped like glittered soda. A wave rolled up, cradling a crown woven from tangled shells, sea urchin spines, and the glint of moon-kissed pearls. With a mischievous grin, the water offered it to her, saying, "Wear us, and the ocean will be your wardrobe." Roro hesitated only a heartbeat before slipping the crown onto her head, feeling the cold snap of coral against her scalp. The cliffs echoed with the sound of gulls cackling like ancient hecklers, as if the sky itself were filming a dramatic reality show. In that instant, the salty air thickened, and the water's pulse synced with her heartbeat, turning her veins into miniature whirlpools. She felt the thrum of every tide, the roar of distant storms, and the tiny sigh of a tide pool shrimp, gross but oddly empowering. With a flick of her wrist, a miniature wave leapt from her hand, splashing the nearby rock and sending a spray of seaweed perfume into the air. The sky darkened, and thunder clapped like applause, announcing her coronation as sovereign of the southern sea. From that moment, she could summon a gentle lap or a ferocious maelstrom with the same casual flick she used to tuck her hair. The news of Roro's ascent rippled inland faster than any royal messenger, and mortal kings began sending envoys bearing gold, silk, and bewildered pigeons that couldn't find Wi-Fi. One king, she politely turned into a storm surge that turned his courtyard into a soggy swamp. Talk about a bad karaoke night. Jealousy swirled among the courts like a hurricane of paperwork, and rumors whispered that the queens of land were now ordering waterproof parchment. Roro laughed, her voice rolling like surf, and reminded them that the sea never runs out of drama, unlike a sitcom that's already been canceled. Now, the southern sea shimmers under moonlight, its waves whispering Roro's name to anyone brave enough to listen. Think of it as the ultimate Spotify playlist curated by a goddess. Fishermen still swear they see a crown of shells glinting beneath the surface, like a lost superhero's helmet waiting for its next cameo. Those who dare approach the cliffs hear her laughter echo, a reminder that power can be as playful as a cat batting at a yarn ball of tsunami. Yet beneath the humor lies a solemn truth. The ocean demands respect, or it will serve you a salty slap that even the toughest Instagram influencer can't filter away. So when you hear the sea call, remember Roro's story, and maybe, just maybe, leave an offering of coconut water. She loves a good tropical cocktail. In the golden age of Mataram, King Prabhu lounged on his teak throne, sipping spiced palm wine while courtiers whispered legends. The most intoxicating tale spoke of Ni Roro Kidul, the fierce queen of the southern sea, whose hair rippled like midnight kelp. Prabhu, ever the ambitious ruler, declared he would claim her realm and wed the ocean herself to shield his kingdom. Nothing beats a royal marriage with a sea queen, he boasted, winking as if the gods were his audience. With a swagger that would make a peacock jealous, he summoned his finest warships, ready to turn myth into a marital contract. Dawn painted the horizon amber as the fleet unfurled its billowing lanterns, each prow humming with eager drums. Sailors polished the hulls until they glistened like a wet dolphin, while the king's trumpeters blared fanfares that rattled the sea foam. The salty breeze slapped Prabhu's beard, and he sniffed the brine, imagining future royal banquets served on coral plates. Yet, as they cut through the water, a distant gull cackled, sounding suspiciously like a sarcastic commentator from a modern reality show. Unfazed, Prabhu shouted, "Forward! The ocean is ours to conquer." And the ships surged southward, their oars churning a frothy wake. By noon, the sky turned a bruised violet, and the Pacific flexed its muscles with a sudden snarling gust. Waves rose like angry towers of foam, slamming the deck with the force of 100 war drums, spraying seaweed and the stench of rotting fish into the air. Rain hammered the masts, a relentless percussion that made the king's armor clink like cheap cosplay armor in a Comic Con rainstorm. The fleet lurched, capsized, and the once proud flag fluttered into the abyss as sailors cursed and clutched at slippery railings. In the chaos, Prabhu's prized war drum cracked, echoing the ocean's laughter, an ironic soundtrack to his mounting hubris. From the rolling tempest emerged Ni Rorokidal herself, her silhouette a phosphorescent veil that shimmered against the storm. She rose on a throne of coral, her eyes twin pearls of moonlight, and her voice rolled like thunder, demanding respect for the sea's autonomy. "You cannot own water," she declared, brandishing a trident that sparked like a neon lightsaber. The king, cheeks flushed with pride, sneered, "I'll marry you, and you'll obey my command." But his words were swallowed by the roaring surf, in a cruel twist worthy of a tragic sitcom finale. A massive wave struck his flagship, tearing it apart and casting the monarch into the cold, salty maw of the ocean. Dripping and shivering, Prabhu clung to a driftwood plank, the taste of brine burning his tongue like a bad espresso. Roro Kidul hovered above, her laughter now gentler, like a lullaby sung by sea turtles on moonlit nights. She whispered that true safety comes not from domination, but from humility, a lesson the king finally felt in his humbled heart. nostalgia and regret. He promised to honor the ocean's will, vowing never again to treat it as a conquered kingdom. The sea, satisfied, calmed its fury, and the kingdom of Mataram learned that even a king must sometimes bow to the tides, lest he become another soggy footnote in legend. Under the flickering lanterns of the royal courtyard, the sly courtier Wirio slunk like a cat with a secret stash of gossip. He watched Ni Rorokidul glide through the moon-kissed colonnades, her sapphire eyes holding the sea's very heartbeat, and felt his pride dissolve into sour envy. In a drunken whisper, he bargained with Kalembai, the rival spirit known for swapping tea for curses, promising a taste of Roro's power. Together, they traced forbidden sigils in the sand, each line humming like a distant power ballad chorus. The night grew thick with the smell of brine and betrayal, setting the stage for a tide that would threaten every thatched roof on the coast. The conjured tide rose like a gigantic emerald serpent, its crest frothing with salty foam that slapped the wind into a salty slapstick. Villagers smelled the ozone of impending disaster, their goats bleating in terror as the water lapped hungrily at their bamboo fences. The monstrous waves surged inland, crushing mangrove roots and sweeping away the scent of incense as if the ocean itself had decided to binge-watch a horror movie. Children clutched their mothers' skirts, eyes wide as lanterns, while the sea roared louder than a J-pop concert gone wrong. Even the moon seemed to gulp a gasp, its pale face paling at the sight of the approaching deluge. Ni Rorokidul stood on the cliffs, her silver hair whipping like a banner in a storm, and summoned the ancient drums of the deep. She felt the pulse of every coral, every fish, every salty tear that ever fell upon the shore, and channeled it into a blade of water brighter than a neon lightsaber. With a fierce laugh that echoed like a siren's karaoke, she hurled her own wave, a tidal fist aimed at the rogue surge. The sea answered, crackling with dark magic that smelled of rot and burnt incense, as Kalimbai's shadow twisted like a smoke-filled Instagram filter. The clash sent spray into the air, each droplet glittering like shattered glass shards in a midnight disco. The battle unfolded on the razor-thin line where land kisses surf, each blow a thunderclap that rattled coconut palms and rattling cheap radios alike. Roro's divine fury turned the water into a swirling vortex, pulling Kalimbai's cursed sigils into a whirlpool that smelled faintly of sandalwood and old socks. The rival spirit snarled, sending shards of black foam that stung like wasabi, but the queen shrugged them off with a flick of her jeweled wrist. As the rogue wave tried to swallow the cliffs, Roro sang an ancient chant that vibrated through the stones, making the earth shudder as if it had taken a double espresso. When the final surge crashed back into the abyss, the sea exhaled, leaving a salty sigh that tasted like triumph mixed with seaweed gumbo. When the water settled, the villagers emerged, coughing up sand and laughing nervously, their shoes squelching like soggy marshmallows. The courtier Wirio, drenched and humbled, slipped away with his tail between his legs, muttering that he'd rather face a traffic jam than Roro's wrath again. Rorokidul stood triumphant, her eyes still glittering with the ocean's secret jokes, and whispered a promise that any future betrayals would be met with a tide so dramatic it would make even Hollywood's blockbuster explosions look tame. The cliffs, scarred but unbowed, sang with the wind, reminding anyone who'd listen that the sea is both a lover and a merciless judge. And so the southern coast breathed a little deeper, its heartbeat sinking once more with the queen who rules both wave and whisper. The sea that had once roared like a teenage rock star in a bad mood finally fell silent, its waves flattening into a glassy mirror that reflected the flaming sunrise. Ni Rorokidul, the emerald-clad queen of the southern sea, rose from the tide as if she'd just stepped off a runway in a sarong made of moonlight. She gritty celebration. With a flick of her sapphire-tipped scepter, Roro summoned a silver-lined path that glimmered beneath the boats, guiding each vessel safely home. The men on the outrigger canoes shouted, "Thank you, Queen," while the salty spray stung their eyes like a mischievous prank. Night fell, and the sea sang a lullaby of clacking shells and distant gull cries, and the fishermen fell asleep on deck, dreaming of fish that behaved like obedient cats. Even the dreaded giant squid, rumored to eat whole fleets, slunk away in embarrassment, its tentacles curling like a frightened cat's tail. The village hearths crackled, releasing the smoky perfume of burnt coconut husks, a reminder that danger had finally been tossed overboard. Roro turned her attention to the rice paddies that stretched like emerald carpets at the water's edge, sprinkling the fields with a mist that smelled of fresh rain and mango leaves. The crops surged upward, green shoots dancing as if they'd just heard a backstage Beyoncé anthem, while the farmers wiped sweating foreheads with laughter. Children chased the glistening droplets, slipping on mud so thick it felt like chocolate pudding under their shoes. In gratitude, the villagers tossed a few extra fish into the sea, whispering, "May the Queen keep our granaries as full as our stomachs after a midnight snack." The Queen declared a pact. Every sunrise must be greeted with a bow, a song, and a promise not to litter the shore with plastic bags that stink of cheap perfume. Humans, she warned, must honor the sea with reverence, or risk turning their nets into soggy laundry piles. Villagers laughed, noting that even modern influencers now hashtag shark sea respect, because apparently the ocean's Instagram likes are more valuable than gold. Yet the pact was serious. A single careless footstep could summon a sudden wave that smacked a fisherman's hat off like a superhero cape. So they lit lanterns, sang goofy chants about kelp smoothies, and vowed to keep their love for the sea as fierce as a caffeine-fueled morning. Each year, as the tide nudges the sands of Pranktritis, the whole community gathers for the ceremony that smells of incense, fried tempeh, and the salty sting of seaweed on the wind. They lay down garlands of frangipani, their petals soft as a lover's whisper, and drizzle fragrant oil on the Queen's stone altar, hoping she'll hear their grateful hearts over the gull's squawks. The elder priestess raises a bamboo flute, and the notes rise like bubbles from a soda can, tickling the ears of both humans and mermaids alike. When the final flower drops into the surf, a gentle ripple rolls outward, as if the Queen herself is winking, saying, "I've got your back, folks, And so the legend lives on, riding the waves of memory, laughter, and a dash of salty irony. High above the rice terraces, Jakatarub trudged through fragrant pine needles, his sandals squelching in the mud like a tired accordion. The moon, a silver walk over the night sky, painted the world with a ghostly gleam that made the distant volcano sigh. Suddenly, a whisper of water beckoned him, and he stumbled upon a hidden lake that glimmered like 1,000 crushed sapphires. The air smelled of wet earth and sweet jasmine, and fireflies flickered around his head like distracted paparazzi. Jaka felt the thrill of a secret discovery, the kind of excitement that makes a farmer forget his aching back. As the clock struck midnight, 7 silhouettes slipped down from the heavens, each draped in robes that shimmered like sequins on a pop star's concert costume. The maidens, known to mortals as the 7 stars, danced on the water's surface, their laughter ringing like cracked bells, and their feet sending ripples that smelled of fresh rain on stone. Their hair floated behind them, a cascade of silk that brushed the lake like a gentle breeze through a bamboo forest. Jaka crouched behind a gnarled boulder, his heart thumping louder than a djembe drum at a village festival. He watched, mesmerized, as the brightest among them, Layla, smiled with a radiance that could outshine any midnight snack. With the cunning of a mischievous monkey, Jaka slipped forward, his fingers trembling as he snatched the glimmering garments and stashed them in a sack of dried corn husks. The maidens shrieked, their cries echoing like a busted kettle, but the lake's mist muffled the panic, turning it into a soggy chorus. He felt a pang of guilt, yet also an odd pride, as if he had just pulled a prank on the gods themselves. The stolen robes lay tangled, their fabrics smelling of moonlit dew and a hint of sweet mango pulp. The irony was thick. A humble farmer now held the keys to celestial fashion, a twist worthy of any Netflix drama. Stripped of her silvery veil, Layla hovered on trembling legs, her eyes wide with a mix of fury and bewilderment, like a cat caught in a rainstorm. With no way to soar back to the sky, she pleaded, but Jaka, now clutching the garments like a trophy, offered a hand instead of a flight path. He coaxed her onto a bamboo mat, promising marriage and a roof that never leaked, though the latter was more hopeful than realistic. Over time, the couple shared meals of spiced cassava and sweet palm sugar, the scent of burnt ginger filling their modest hut as they laughed over their unlikely union. Yet every night, Layla stared at the glittering stars, feeling the tug of the cosmos like an old song stuck on repeat. Their love became the talk of the highlands, a bittersweet saga whispered around crackling fires, as ironic as a cow that refuses to moo. Jaka's village celebrated him as a hero, while the heavens rolled their celestial eyes, wondering why mortals always think they can rewrite destiny. Layla, forever caught between Earth's mud and the sky's glitter, learned to dance with the fireflies, finding comfort in their tiny lights. In the end, the hidden lake still mirrors the moon, and the 7 stars return each night, their robes waiting like a lost Wi-Fi signal, always just out of reach. And so, the legend of Jakatarobe and his celestial bride endures, reminding us that love can be as fragile as a moth's wing and as stubborn as a stubborn rooster on a sunrise. Jakatarub hammered the bamboo ribs of his new home, while Layla coaxed the rice husks into a thatch roof, their hands blistered and laughing like mischievous fireflies. The scent of fresh earth rose with every scoop, mixing with the sweet perfume of jasmine that clung to Layla's braid. Neighbors stopped by with baskets of durian, smelly, spiky gifts that made the kids gag and the elders grin. Even the village dog named Momo tried to nest in the doorway, only to be shooed away with a playful slap. By sunset, a modest hut stood against the emerald rice paddies, its tin roof glinting like a rogue mirror. Mornings began with Jaka's rooster crowing louder than a rock concert amp, jolting the couple into a rhythm of chores and chuckles. They tended the garden, pulling weeds that smelled of damp mud and bitter pepper, while Layla sang ancient lullabies that made the nearby river sway in tempo. Meals were simple: stewed ikan, fish, spiced with chili that set tongues on fire, followed by sticky rice that clung to teeth like stubborn secrets. Their laughter echoed through the bamboo walls, a sound that even the wind seemed to borrow, carrying it to distant hills. In those bright hours, the world felt as cozy as a warm blanket wrapped around a tired cat. But the heavens were not idle. The 6 forgotten maidens, still cloaked in starlight, scoured the night sky for their missing silk robes. They rattled the constellations, sending gusts that whistled through village thatched roofs like a busted accordion. Strange lights flickered, greenish auroras that painted the thatch with eerie brushstrokes, making the villagers stare with mouths agape and an uneasy shiver crawling up their spines. Children whispered that the sky had caught a cold, while elders muttered prayers louder than a karaoke night at a wedding. The atmosphere grew heavy, as if the very air had been seasoned with a pinch of dread and a dash of cinematic suspense. Layla stared upward each night, her heart fluttering like a moth caught in a lantern's glow, yearning for the sisterhood she'd left behind. The cool breezes that slipped through the cracked windows smelled faintly of starlight for Jaka, and an ache for the glittering sky she could no longer touch. Even as Jaka returned from the field, wiping sweat from his brow, he sensed the shift, a subtle tension that crackled like static before a thunderstorm. He tried to coax Layla with a joke about cows moonwalking, but the grin that slipped onto his face fizzled like a damp firecracker. The village folk gathered, eyes wide, as the winds intensified, rustling leaves into a frantic dance, and the strange lights pulsed like a disco ball on a haunted stage. In that moment, the modest home felt both a cradle and a cage, sheltering love while echoing the cosmic drama above. And so the legend twinkled on, reminding anyone who listened that even the simplest roof can be a stage for a tragedy written in the stars. Under a bruised dawn, a ragged hermit slipped into Jaka Tarub's bamboo hut, his cloak smelling of incense and rain-slick earth. He claimed to carry a missive from the Celestial Council, a flock of flickering stars that had taken offense at his theft. The words tumbled out like pebbles, warning that the stolen 7 maidens had upset the balance of the heavens, and that the sky itself now muttered uneasy prayers. Jaka stared, his eyes as wide as a wok on a fire, half convinced the old man was a wandering TikTok guru about cosmic justice. The hermit raised a gnarled staff, tapping it against the thatched roof, and the thrum of distant thunder answered like a drum roll. The night after the hermit vanished, Layla's once radiant glow began to flicker, casting a pallid amber that smelled faintly of burnt sugar. Villagers whispered that the sky had caught a cold. The wind howled through the rice paddies, rattling tin roofs with a sound like an angry kettle. Every gust carried the sour stench of swamp rot, and the rains fell in sudden sheets that drenched the earth with a slap that felt like a slap-handed insult. Jaka felt a knot of guilt crawl up his spine, as if 1,000 tiny snakes were rehearsing a tango in his gut. He watched Layla drift farther from his hearth, her light dimming like a dying phone battery on a desperate road trip. Jaka tried to console himself by recalling the old legend of the Monkey King, who stole peaches and faced a celestial court. Except his story didn't end with banana bread and applause. He paced the mud-slick path to the river, sloshing ankle-deep water that smelled of fish guts and algae, muttering curses that would make a sailor blush. His heart thumped like a drumline in a marching band, each beat echoing the irony that his love had become a cosmic traffic jam. Villagers gathered around the fire, chuckling at his melodrama, while simultaneously fearing the next storm would wash away their thatched roofs and their sanity. The hermit's warning swirled in his mind like incense smoke, a reminder that love without responsibility is as useless as a Wi-Fi router in a bamboo forest. The hermit reappeared just before the village's first gale, perched on a banyan branch like a grandpa from a sitcom who never left the set. He pointed a crooked finger at the heavens and shouted, "The stars are on strike. They demand their maidens back, or they'll send us a sequel that even Netflix can't binge." Lightning cracked, splintering the dark like popcorn popping, while the wind hurled debris that smelled of wet straw and sour sweat. Jaka could hear the distant clang of celestial armor, a sound as metallic as a samurai sword being sharpened in a thrift store garage. With a grim grin, he realized his love story had turned into a tragedy worthy of a Shakespearean opera, only with more thunder and fewer iambic pentameters. Facing the storm's crescendo, Jaka made a pact with the sky. He would return the 7 stars, even if it meant watching Layla's light fade like the last credits of a blockbuster. He gathered his courage, the scent of burning kerosene from the village's torch-lit altar filling his nostrils, and marched toward the mountain where the maidens were held captive. The clouds roared approval, dripping rain that tasted like iron filings, while the villagers prayed in a chorus that sounded like a choir of frogs on a hot night. When he released the celestial sisters, their brilliance exploded, painting the heavens ones with colors brighter than any modern neon sign. Layla's smile returned, but the cost lingered. Jaka's heart now bore the weight of a love that had once stolen the stars, and the village learned that even the sweetest romance can summon a tempest. On that luminous full moon night, the village of Siwide glowed like a spilled bottle of glow-in-the-dark paint. The 7 stars, draped in silken shawls of midnight, slipped back from the earth, their footfalls rustling the rice field's stalks. Layla stood at the edge of the bamboo grove, heart hammering like a busted tam-tug engine, torn between love for Jaka and the tug of destiny. The night air smelled of burnt incense and wet earth, while crickets chirped a soundtrack that sounded oddly like a low-budget sci-fi soundtrack. Above, the constellations watched, as if the celestial audience had just ordered popcorn. With a trembling voice that sounded like a broken gamelan string, Layla spilled the secret. She was not merely a village maiden, but the youngest of the celestial sisters, stitched into the night by a pact older than the kingdom's oldest rickshaw. Jaka's eyebrows shot up faster than a TikTok trend, and he swore he'd never been so confused in his life. The moon, a pale witness, reflected on his sweat-slick brow, making him look like a wet noodle in a superhero costume. He tried to grip Layla's hands, feeling the cold of her skin like a marble statue that had just been dunked in a bucket of cold water. The irony was thick. He'd spent years chasing a legend, only to find the legend was trying to escape him. Jaka lunged, pulling Layla closer, as if he could yank the heavens down to earth with a single hug. He whispered promises louder than a market hawker selling durian, swearing that love could rewrite the stars' schedule. The wind mocked him, rattling the thatched roofs and scattering leaves like confetti at a parade he'd never been invited to. Yet the silken garments of the 7 stars fluttered back into place, snapping shut like a suit of armor on a clumsy night. A sudden sour stench of ozone rose, the universe's way of saying, "Nice try, buddy, but you've missed the deadline." From the sky hurled a bolt of celestial fire, bright enough to make a superhero's laser eye look like a birthday candle. It sliced through the night, tearing Jaka's arms away from Layla's waist. The crack echoed like a gong in a battlefield karaoke bar, and Layla's scream cracked the air, half human, half comet. In an instant, her form dissolved into glittering stardust, spiraling upward until she became the brightest of the 7, a new point of light that winked at mortals like a mischievous selfie. Jaka felt the heat on his cheek, the smell of singed hair, and the gritty taste of ash on his tongue, as if the universe had just sneezed on his soul. He fell to his knees, clutching the empty space where her heart had beat, while the fire fizzled out like a busted firecracker. The irony, now fully seasoned, was that his love had turned her into a literal star, the kind you can't actually date. The remaining 6 sisters scattered across the heavens, each taking a slot in the night sky like a celebrity on a red carpet runway. Their gowns fluttered away, leaving trails of silver that smelled faintly of old sandalwood and rain-soaked mangoes. Villagers below gazed up, half awake, whispering that the world had just been rebooted, while Jaka's heart thumped like a bass drum in a lo-fi chill beat playlist. He rose, his clothes smeared with starlight dust, and trudged home, the path slippery with moonlit puddles that reflected his shattered hopes. In the end, the night of reckoning became a legend whispered around campfires, a reminder that love can be as brilliant and as brutally fleeting as a fireworks display. At a midnight karaoke competition, Jakatarab slouched on the cracked bamboo mat, the moonlight spilling across his weather-worn back like a silvery blanket. The night air smelled of fried tempeh and distant river mud, a reminder that even legends get a whiff of reality. He had lost the 7 celestial maidens, and now the world seemed as empty as his own empty stomach after a bout of fasting. A lone firefly buzzed near his ear, teasing him with a flicker that felt like the universe's own sarcastic wink. In that hush, Jaka felt the humbling ache of a heart stripped of its divine companions. He lifted his gaze, and the 7 stars stitched themselves across the heavens, outlining a curve that mirrors the graceful arc of his beloved's smile. The pattern glimmered like a glittery Instagram filter, except it didn't need any Photoshop wizardry. Jaka laughed, a dry sand-scratch sound at the cosmic joke. He'd once tried to steal a star-woven shawl, and now the sky teased him back. Each twinkle sang a soft, high-pitched note, like the distant ringtone of a celestial phone call he could never answer. The irony soaked his soul. He had chased the heavens, only to find them playing hide-and-seek with his own longing. Driven by stubborn love, Jaka gathered river stones, palm fronds, and the bittersweet scent of jasmine that clung to his father's old sandal. He piled them into a crooked altar on the hilltop, hammering a cracked coconut shell into place as if it were a sacred gong. The wind howled through the bamboo, rattling the hollow shrine like a haunted organ, while fireflies performed a nervous jitterbug around the offering. Nearby, a mischievous pig snorted, slurping up spilled rice water, reminding Jaka that even divinity must endure the daily grind of mud and manure. When the first sunrise kissed the shrine, the stone walls glowed amber, and the 7 stars seemed to bow, acknowledging his crude but sincere tribute. The tale of Jaka's shrine spread faster than a viral meme, traveling from village elders to bustling markets, and eventually to the grand courts where scholars debated its meaning over cups of strong coffee. Some whispered that the 7 stars were the original Avengers, each maiden's a celestial superhero, forever battling boredom in the night sky. Travelers recounted hearing rustling leaves that sounded like whispered gossip about Jaka's love life, as if the forest itself were a gossip column. Even the palace clowns performed a slapstick reenactment, slipping on banana peels while pointing at the glittering pattern, proving that tragedy can wear a clown's oversized shoes. Yet beneath the laughter, the legend kept a solemn pulse, reminding every listener that the heavens can be both a stage and a cruel audience. Now, when children crawl up the hill and press their palms against the weathered shrine, they feel a cool breath like a lover's sigh, tinged with the scent of incense and damp earth. The 7 stars still glitter, stubborn as a Wi-Fi signal in a mountain cabin, flashing the reminder that love, even mortal, can stitch itself into the cosmos. Jaka's name is whispered at night, a cautionary lullaby that even the fiercest heart can be humbled by a sky full of glitter. In every flicker, the fragile bond between flesh and infinity shivers, like a moth caught in a bug zapper, beautiful yet terrifying. So the legend lives on, a stubborn reminder that the universe may be eternal, but our love stories are the fireworks that make it worth watching.